questions are surfacing regarding who will be the next Speaker of the House, with many Democrats upset over House Speaker Pelosi's lack of leadership. Now, if Pelosi cannot conjure up enough votes to gain re-election to the House speakership, it's unclear whether a more moderate or progressive representative will then fill that seat. However, the consensus in the media is that it's time for Pelosi to go with many younger Democrats, calling for a fresh face to take her place.
So all over Twitter, actually, a lot of people are saying that they think AOC would be a good replacement for House Speaker. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that one too. Yeah, she's great.
I would love that.
Honestly, I think I would really love that. I'm a big fan of AOC.
I think that she would be a great addition.
AOC's great, but I think she speaks for a much smaller part of the Democratic Party, especially of the Democratic Party that are in the Congress. Yeah. So I don't know if she should be Speaker yet, but I could see that one day.
Joining me now is Jezzamine Wolk, a reporter with Campus Reform, from that video that you just saw. So, Jezzamine, it's really good to have you on the program tonight. That video, by the way, was very interesting because we hear about younger people generally being more progressive, but you actually got them to say it on camera and got a little bit more insight into exactly what their thinking is. So, really quickly, I just want to get your take on what prompted that video and what you heard as well.
Right. So Democrats expected a blue wave this election and actually ended up losing seats in the House. And we saw many people blame that on the leadership of Nancy Pelosi. So I wanted to hear from college students if they felt she should step down from her position as House Speaker, and if so, who they thought should replace her. So I headed to American University in D.C., and what I found was that overwhelmingly, these students wanted younger, newer, and more progressive leadership. But what was alarming was how many of these people thought the idea of a Speaker, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, would be a good idea for our nation.
And, you know, that is a little bit telling within itself because you were on a college campus. People there are generally educated. I'd like to think that they are, but sometimes it's up for debate. But it's also in Washington, D.C. So these are people who are also probably politically minded as well. It's not like, for example, they're out here in California and they are so distant from D.C. that they may not pay attention to it. These are people who do pay attention to politics. So what were they saying when they were saying that they do want someone like AOC to be Speaker?
You know, what they were saying was they were leaning on identity politics. A lot of these people were saying she's a woman and she's a minority. And, you know, what they're looking for is someone more progressive and fiery. And it's because this idea of progressive is being pushed in the classroom. And this is something that the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform continues to cover across the nation. We recently just saw at the University of California, Angela Davis, who's a frequent campus speaker, blame racism on capitalism. And then she pushed socialism as an alternative. And, you know, a lot of professors across the nation are pushing this socialist agenda. We saw it again at Michigan State University, where another professor actually canceled his courses so that his students could attend a socialist conference. So again, you know, we would never see that if it was for a conservative conference. So we shouldn't be surprised that these students want someone who's even more progressive than Pelosi.
And that's really interesting, too, because, of course, we hear that this does go on college campuses. I think anyone who's been to a college knows that there is a liberal slant, to say the very least. But to see it up front, that's something a little bit different. And when it comes to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, too, I know that the media is a little bit, calls her the media darling a little bit. They are willing to give her more favorable coverage. But I think there's also something to be said there where, for example, a lot of young people are also willing to give in to Bernie Sanders and his ideology, things of that nature. I know that a lot of young people broke for him over Joe Biden as well. Is there a reason why you think young people are more willing to give into these more transformative ideas than the more traditional establishment moderates?
Absolutely. Actually, you know, bring up Joe Biden. I've spoken to hundreds of college students, and a lot of them weren't even passionate about the idea of a Biden presidency. At the end of the day, they just wanted to get Trump out. But they thought that Biden was the better avenue to being able to push their liberal agenda, such as defund the police. And we're seeing that across the nation where these students think that, well, they're seeing the divide between the Democratic Party, right? So they're seeing the more moderates saying that socialism is actually to blame for them losing House seats in the House and terms like defund the police. But then on the opposite side, they're seeing progressives like the Squad who are saying that it's people like Kamala Harris and her support of the Green New Deal and Medicare for All that actually helps them win to victory. So again, these students, yes, they're seeing the divide, but at the end of the day, they're leaning more towards the progressive side.
And I feel like that's part of the reason why Senator Kamala Harris was put on the ticket, because Joe Biden, I mean, a lot of people say that he's a vehicle for these progressive ideologies, but Joe Biden himself has 40 years on his record that say otherwise. I think a lot of people who are more familiar with Joe Biden's record know that he's not necessarily on board with defunding the police, but a lot of the people that are possibly going to be in his potential administration or lawmakers that support him as well, they do support things like defund the police. And in fact, I know a lot of our viewers have heard it before, but Senator Kamala Harris was rated as the most progressive voter in the Senate back in 2019. So I feel like she brings maybe a little bit more of the excitement, if you will, with her, in the hopes that for many young people that she will be as progressive as she was in the Senate. So is that what you're hearing as well? Is Kamala Harris perhaps a little bit more popular among younger people than Joe Biden?
Oh, absolutely. These young people were fired up about the idea of, a minority woman, again, like AOC, even though she was a former top cop, even with her poor record with minorities and, criminal justice. But again, these students are pushing more for that progressive agenda. And at the end of the day, it's because they haven't been exposed to the horrors of socialism in the classroom. These students aren't learning that it leads to poverty and starvation, which we see in Venezuela and in Cuba. And I mean, there is a reason why so many Cubans came out to vote for President Trump this election. It's because they have seen firsthand what socialism does to a country, and they don't want that to happen here. But again, these students are being taught in the classroom that socialism is the future of America, and this should concern all Americans.
And that is a really excellent point because, for example, I've been told for the past 4 years that Latinos and blacks were going to break away from President Trump in historic numbers, and that just wasn't the case. In fact, we saw President Trump build on his support among black voters better than what he did in 2016. And the Latino voters, I mean, he outperformed what anybody was expecting him to do as far as that goes. So I feel like there is a disconnect between the media narrative and what people on the ground are actually thinking, which makes your type of journalism that much more important because we're not looking at polls, we're hearing from the people within themselves. But you did say that many of the young people believe that progressivism is the future of the country. I think at the very least there's a conversation to be had about whether progressivism is the future of the Democratic Party, because it certainly does seem to be going that way. Do you think that it is?
Oh, absolutely. And, like I said, a lot of these young voters that we speak to look up to people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and like Bernie Sanders, and they want our country to go more in that direction. And this is concerning because, I mean, what did we just see recently from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? She said that she wants to put anyone who worked for Trump on a list and essentially, make sure that they never work in government again. And we're also seeing that same treatment of conservatives echoed on college campuses. We just saw this at Texas A&M University, where one professor, the university actually worked with an anonymous Twitter account to essentially create a burn book of conservative students. And there was another Texas university who basically, there was a group who said that they would not allow college students to join a conservative group freshman year without them doxing them. So again, these college students are looking up to these people who are just trying to cancel conservatives. So yes, I absolutely think that it's concerning because this is the next generation of leaders, and they'll make up the largest voting bloc of Americans, and they want our country to turn more socialist.
And Jezzamine, I've followed your reporting for a little bit now, and there was even an example where some college professors were saying that they can't use Fox News as a source on some papers, almost saying that it was the same thing as using Wikipedia or just some random blog site. So I think that you're right to say that it does start from the top, and the ideology kind of trickles down from that point forward. So I think that there's a bigger issue to address than merely what young people are thinking. I think that there's something that starts in the classroom, and the ideology really grows from there. But Jezzamine Wolk, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program tonight. Really telling us about your experience on the ground, because it's something that is more important than ever before. Thank you.
Thanks so much.